All right, class, let's tackle chapter 9 on creation and the original state of humans. So from Mbiti's text, we get the general rule that generally African traditional religions acknowledge that God is the originator of humans, and that as an originator, we hear that creation from clay, the idea that we're created from soil, right, is widespread. And there was some interesting conversation about how indigenous one might feel if one understood oneself to have come from the very clay of the ground. Then another possibility is that one came from under the earth. And the word chthonic means under the earth. And thus a people who arise from the earth are called autochthonic. Another way they might have, the Creator may have brought them into being was from a vessel, like a canoe. And there's also the possibility that you've come from another world, kind of sounds like either another dimension or a sky. And so again, all of these ideas are very material as well as spatial. So I hope that this metaphor we're using throughout the semester about a religious life as providing a map, and that one navigates on that map, I hope all of these spatial kinds of descriptions of where humans came from works well for that metaphor. All right, so then, however, comes this thing, the rupture, the cause. It separated humans from God's plenitude. So, as Mbiti concludes here down on the bottom, however the separation occurred, it brought, I need to spell check, disadvantageous and tragic consequences to men. That man was the main loser from the rupture, and that these consequences disrupted the original state of man. So we're going to think a little bit about this rupture right now. I am trained as a comparativist who studies many traditions. What we know is that the depiction of a rupture is common to most traditions, from the Garden of Eden story in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, right? Since all three of those traditions trace their root to Abraham, they are all called Abrahamic traditions, and they all then have this same story about expulsion from the Garden of Eden, to Hinduism's origin stories that depict our mental and illusory separation from Brahma, the original creator, to the variety of the stories found across Africa. The rupture is one of the major common themes across religions. If you want to come up with one of the few things you can say across religions, then the origin story with the rupture that separates humans from the Creator, that's one of the few you can find across so many traditions. Mbiti knows that African traditional religions take this separation to be the case, and they do their best with intermediaries, like the spirits that we've learned about, to breach the gap. They make sacrifices seeking life. They give life, hoping to receive life. They make offerings, gifts to the Creator, and they use intermediaries sufficient to cross that gap and earn the benevolence, that early state of plenitude. They want to return to that. And those are their practices for so doing. Now, I've got this here that I'm going to make big and play, because one of the origin stories is about the pestle, that the woman was working with the pestle and it drove God away. And here's an example of that noise. Where is, does I bet Camtasia has taken over the sound. Okay, so I'm going to give you guys the link. Part of what I thought was remarkable about this video is looking, I mean, how many of you are hoping to get that job when you go to Africa? Look at the technique going on here and the physicality of making, this one is called fufu, and it's a major form of food in Accra. So there's, you'll be able to go and have a look and listen to her there. I didn't realize that Camtasia would take over the audio. That kind of makes sense. But now you've seen a pestle, and once you get to there and hear it, then you'll start to understand why it's quite funny that this origin story that, here we go. That's funny, it won't let me go little there. There we go. Okay, so here we are back to the rupture. And that man was the main loser. Now, Mbiti concludes the chapter with a rather odd claim regarding the kind of popularity or social efficacy of those traditions that, unlike African traditions, who accept that the case is we're separated. This is clearly not just plenitude. But that there are traditions which offer a vision of the future in which a redemptive return to coexistence with God is promised, that the rupture will be overcome. Now, I'm sure you've all heard talk about the rapture, the moment when the rupture is overcome and the Christian God will reunite with his chosen people. Now, personally, I maybe tend more towards that kind of African worldview where I'll take the world as it is right now, but I wouldn't mind scoring a leftover full suspension mountain bike if anybody else gets raptured who's a biker. Mbiti suggests that these redemptive traditions, that is, the traditions in which the gap is restored and humans are redeemed to the land of plenitude, these traditions are three-dimensional because they offer a past, a present, and a future that will restore you, redeem and restore you. In contrast, Mbiti suggests that ATRs are only two-dimensional with Sasa and Zamani. He speculates that ATRs will suffer for their concentration on Sasa and Zamani, and that traditions that offer a vision of a future reconnection will win as religions over ATRs. Now, I think you might view this rather odd conclusion as a symptom of Mbiti's time and his relationship to Christianity back in the 60s, rather than as a substantive evaluation of the merits of these worldviews. I think it is far too simplistic a reading of the depths of Sasa and Zamani to claim that they are two-dimensional. And so his conclusion sounds to me more like a type of Christian apologetics, which is a style of argument. It doesn't mean Christians are apologizing. It means it's a style of argument that helps explain things through a Christian frame. So it sounds to me more like a Christian apologetics than it does an analysis of the impact of Christianity and Islam and why they might be carrying the day. So, what the story of the rupture creates, let's go back to this little, here we go. What the story of the rupture creates. Whether you are in the African setting or in an Abrahamic tradition, is an explanation of the woes and troubles of the human condition. Here's the human problem. With so much that is great about being alive and eating good food, humans still confront their mortality and the disparity in luck between those who have plenty and those who suffer from scarcity and disease. Why do bad things happen to good people? Kinds of questions. And so I've indicated this here on a scale of the human condition where on the upper end of it, you've got maybe perhaps remarkable luck, great prosperity, great health. And on the lower end of the spectrum are those who suffer from scarcity and disease. And so the human condition, we see this spectrum happening, and which raises the question, if the Creator is capable of plenitude, why is there this disparity here? The myth of the rupture or separation explains this disconnection between the created plenitude and the human condition within that plenitude, right? So that there's a gap between the ideal and the experience. Now, the problem of the human condition does not go away for those whose story tells about a future redemption. In fact, the non-arrival of the redemptive return actually kind of poses a threat to the story itself, that there's going to be a rapture. Ask anyone who went to a hilltop to experience the rapture, or the end of the Mayan calendar, or other such thresholds to the new redemption, right? If it doesn't arrive, then there's some more explaining that's got to go on. I think Mbidi has falsely attributed a kind of popularity or power to the redemption narrative, whereas the data about which traditions will win in Africa has much more to do with cultural capital, who's got the economic and military power that allows for the production of text, the dissemination through television and radio, etc., than it does with whether one of these stories is satisfying and one of them is not. So I hope you might consider that, and we'll move on to Chapter 10.